producer on the digital program at M+. M+ is a museum in Hong Kong that's currently under construction and it's set to open its main doors by the end of 2020. Before working at M+, I was at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Melbourne. Before that I was working in documentary film for public broadcasters, so I sort of fell into museums a little bit by mistake. We have been operating as a museum since 2012. We've got a lot of programs happening at the moment, even though our main building isn't open. And today I'd like to share one of those programs. It's obviously a digital one. It's our editorial platform. I sort of go into what worked, what didn't. And I'd like to also sort of talk about these four main themes. That's tagging, language accessibility, and making things that fit. One of my colleagues at my old work said something once when we were developing a program for the David Bowie exhibition. We're brainstorming all these ideas, and he sort of just said at the end of the session, how do we make something that fits into somebody's day? And the more I've thought about this, the more I also think about how when we talk about making things that fit, we should also think about it from an institutional perspective as well. How do we make something sustainable and something that somebody can spend their days working in a way that makes sense? So I'll be talking about that as well. So just to take a step back, I'll tell you a little bit about the institution and our background. M+ is dedicated to collecting, exhibiting, interpreting visual art, design and architecture and moving image, as well as Hong Kong visual culture of the 20th and 21st centuries. As I mentioned, although our main building is still under construction, we have been operating as a museum since 2012. We have a space at the moment called the M+ Pavilion. This is it here. So this is like our testing ground for basically the future building. Another example of a project we've done in the past in the digital sphere is the Neon Signs project. So this was partly a crowdsourced project where people took photographs of neon signs all over Hong Kong. As it is a disappearing part of the city. The people that are making these signs have sort of reached retirement age now and no one's sort of picking up the craft. So that was a really interesting project and a good way of sort of engaging with people before we have a building and means to sort of talk with them and create dialogues with them physically. We're part of the West Kowloon Cultural District, so it's a big tract of land along Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong. A number of cultural institutions sit within this cultural district. M+ is just one of them. It's been in the works now for a number of years, and I think an important point to note, and this affects most of our projects, is that we share a lot of staff with the district. So our museum doesn't have a dedicated ICT, legal, marketing or HR team. We're actually sharing these resources with the West Kowloon Cultural District, which obviously consists of other cultural entities. So that's a really sort of important point, I guess, in a way we have to think about our projects in terms of how they're structured and how we engage with other teams, not only within our own museum, but within the district as a whole. Our museum has a footprint of about 17,000 square metres of gallery space, so it's a pretty big building, which also makes the pavilion not the best test case venue for us, just because it's a very small space, so it's difficult to obviously do testing and planning for potential audiences that will visit the building. Taking another step back, just to provide you with a bit of context about the region and the amount of change that's happening. This is the Pearl River Delta. So Hong Kong's obviously part of that, but it also includes other major metropolises such as Shenzhen, Guangzhou and Macau. This is a relatively small area, but it's one that's becoming more and more interconnected. So within this region, it's about 120 million people. So it's one of the most densely populated parts of the world. And there's a real appetite, I think, for museums within this region. There's a lot of new places opening, particularly in mainland China. So M+ is obviously part of that movement. Hong Kong's a special autonomous region of China, so it does have its own laws. Similar to Macau, I suppose, you do need passports when you're sort of traveling between these cities. So it's still not completely open as of the moment. In terms of language, and this affects all our workflows and all the work we do, Hong Kong's a primarily Cantonese-speaking city, and the traditional Chinese script is used. So most of our outputs are bilingual. This website, definitely everything with M+ stories, everything we've thought about it in terms of workflows, in terms of what we show the public is always done bilingually. I guess that's in contrast to English, which uses a simplified script and primarily speaks Mandarin. And this is just to give you a sense of the scale of things to come. So in the foreground, we have the cultural district. That's a big construction site on Kowloon Peninsula. So our museum is only part of that. It's this section in here. That's Hong Kong Island in the distance. And this is looking back the other way from Hong Kong Island to Kowloon. So where those red lattice structures are, that's the museum being built. This was taken about a year and a half ago now. It's really difficult for us to fly drones in this space and take these photos because it's a restricted airspace. So there has been a lot of progress since these photos were taken. And this is what our building's finally going to look like. I suppose a key point to mention again is without a physical location, digital becomes really important for us to connect with audiences and share our content. And this is kind of where we are at the moment. So this was taken about a month ago now. We're about to top out the building, so that top structure is almost finished. So we're about to transition to a museum without a building to a museum with a building, which is really exciting. And I suppose all of our work, everything we're doing is leading up to this moment when the building finally opens. So we begin most meetings with these really big timelines and intimidating Gantt charts, looking 2 years into the future and sort of planning how to get there and how to launch all our projects in a way that's successful. And another thing I just want to talk about, aside from building all the physical infrastructure, our team's also growing really quickly as well. So this was the first team photo taken at M+. It's from 2011. It's a very small team, obviously, and this is just when we started collecting objects. So just before that, we started collecting material in 2012. This is our team photo taken last year. So obviously there's a lot of growth there, but we've grown even more. So this is the team photo from our away day a couple of weeks ago. I think it's also really interesting too because we've clearly become a lot more institutionalized in terms of structure and layout, and I think this sort of obviously reflects the move from startup to actual museum in terms of the way we operate. I guess it's also a really good illustration of how we have to think really carefully about our projects because we have so many new people coming on and there's such a large amount of growth in such a short amount of time. So a lot of the work we do is about thinking not only 2 years ahead, but structuring our projects in such a way that it makes sense. So we can build collaborative workflows across the organization, and we're basically doing everything for the first time. So it's a little bit intimidating, but it's also a really good reason to do things properly from the start and build in a really rigorous structure to put our projects in good standing for the long term. I just wanted to show a few images from our collection. So these are some of the objects we've featured on the website recently. And just to give you sort of a flavour of the stuff that's in the collection. Our aim is to create a new kind of museum that reflects our unique time and place, a museum that builds on Hong Kong's historic balance of the local and international, and to define a new and innovative voice for the 21st century. These are some of the pieces. This is a cool one. This is us taking a neon sign into custody. So on the left we have the original design of a neon sign, and on the right a lot of these neon signs have now become illegal. They don't meet the governance laws of Hong Kong, so they have to be taken down. And a lot of these places, luckily enough for us, are happy to donate their signs to the museum where we can preserve them and ultimately present them one day to the public again. So, one of the things that we wanted to sort of answer with this project and plus stories was how do you talk about a museum without a building? How do we create a meaningful dialogue with our audiences? And how can we sort of learn about them and get this feedback and input it into our long-term goals? Stories was designed and developed by Zach Group, a UK design and coding firm. And we worked in collaboration with them as well as the curatorial team. So at M+, the digital team falls within the curatorial team structure. The work that went into this build obviously touched all parts of the museum and district though. So that includes legal staff, marketing representatives, as well as people from throughout the operations team at M+. And this is just a really sort of quick snapshot of content from over the website. We launched M+ Stories in 2017. It's the first permanent online space that's run by M+ staff. So pre-stories, we had a bunch of microsites, some of which continue to get a lot of attention, like the neon science one. But I guess what's really important about this website is that it's taken care of by M+ alone. So we don't rely on marketing, we don't rely on IT assistance in terms of upkeep outside of server maintenance. Everything is controlled internally by the museum. And I think that's really important in terms of workflows and in terms of setting ourselves up and sort of building our team out in the right way so we have the right skills and expertise later on when we launch the museum website, which is due to come online in a couple of years. Stories also brings together content from across the museum. So I suppose just in terms of sections, it includes a blog, long-form journal articles, videos, and now we also include online commissions with artists. And I just included a few screenshots from it. So with M+ Stories, we want to show this growth in activity of our museum by taking a look at what it means to build a museum from scratch. Talk more about our daily goings-on, what's happening behind the scenes, because there's already so much hard work happening to get this museum up and running by the end of 2020, as well as provide greater access to our collections and our areas of interest. So I think that's an important point. We made a decision that not all content that ends up on M+ Stories necessarily has to be derived from our collection. We can talk about things that we find interesting and things that we think our audiences might be interested in. As I mentioned, everything that we do at this point in our development needs to contribute to long-term goals and projects. This includes building a museum website, developing in-gallery experiences and their content, whilst also establishing our content strategies and open access initiative. Online becomes a main place for us to share our content, activities, research, and connect with audiences. And yeah, I'll also talk about some of the things that we've learned along the way. As with any digital project, it's not always a smooth process, especially when you're doing things for the first time. So there are a lot of learnings that we took away from this project that can feed into subsequent larger scale projects as well. So before we delve any deeper, I just want to talk very quickly about what digital means for M+. What it means for a museum and how we see a storytelling platform fitting within our broader digital footprint. So we define digital at M+ in three main aspects. That's content, insights, and products. These three aspects of our work are all connected. Products are how the content is distributed or shown to our audiences, like our in-gallery guide or a website. But without content, those products wouldn't be as meaningful. Insights are how we learn from both the product and the content to better understand what our visitors are interested in and how they would like to engage with us so we can engage with them on a more meaningful level. So content is obviously where everything starts. It all stems from content, and if content is where we start, our main business becomes that of storytelling. So M+ Stories has become a really valuable space for us to experiment with storytelling outside of exhibition spaces, which we haven't been necessarily easy to do in the past. It's allowed us to experiment with a tagging taxonomy for editorial content, provide access to the collections, establish bilingual workflows for video content as well as all content, and that's been a really insightful process for us. It's allowed us to build out an interim branding strategy, and it's also been invaluable in terms of building working across departments. I think importantly too, stories is a space for us to fill in some of our knowledge gaps about the Hong Kong museum visitor, and actually discover how an institution goes from getting an idea to publishing that online with a relatively small team. I think we see every piece of content as being able to tell a story and has the potential to spark a conversation. This is a video interview we did with the great Hong Kong photographer who sadly passed away now, Ho Fan. He took these beautiful images of Hong Kong back in the days, 1940s, 1950s. And what we found when we posted this video, so we're learning all the time, is we didn't create it specifically for Facebook. We're not that so far advanced in our content strategies at the moment. We just created a video, but without too much sponsoring or advertising or anything, it had a really big organic reach and a lot of reactions relatively for us. So this is something that we can take back and think about when we look at our editorial strategy moving forward, and what kinds of stories that we might want to tell as it relates to our collection and also areas of interest for us. This is another piece that we launched recently about Hong Kong being a consistent location for video games, and that sort of really did quite well for us. It really makes us think about what content really connects with our audiences, what images we should use when sharing content. So there's a lot of sort of intricate details in there that we're constantly learning from, and how we should use different images to share content with specific audiences. So an example is the image on the left worked really well with non-gamers and people from outside of Hong Kong. This is for the same article, mind you. The image on the right of Charlie and Fat with the gun, that worked really well with Hong Kong audiences and gamers. So there's a better response from those audiences. And that's just our statistics from this post. So it's obviously something that sparked a lot of conversation online and did relatively well for us for a pretty new website. And interestingly enough, I think an important point is that we've been able to hold on to a lot of that audience subsequently, which is pretty nice to see. And the thing I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is accessibility, because that's something that we took very seriously with this project. We decided early on that inclusivity and accessibility was core to the platform's experience. For us, that's meant offering closed captions and transcripts for all our time-based media outlets. We've worked very closely with the Hong Kong Blind Union to ensure that keyboard accessibility and skip links are working properly. We've started an alt text project which not only speaks to content on N+ stories, but our collections data more broadly. And it also sort of informed a lot of our technical decisions. So obviously you can create a lot of this content and post it in a successful way on platforms such as Medium. But when we look at Medium, we look at how it handles Chinese text, we look at its lack of support for accessibility features. It kind of ruled out those platforms from the get-go. So it's also allowed us to sort of build our technical expertise and the infrastructure behind the scenes to properly support these elements of web design. And here's just a very simple example of part of the workflows that have sort of been derived from this project. This is alt text. Everything we do obviously has to be done bilingually, and this has a major effect on our workflows, our translation processes, and our editing. So transcripts and closed captions, as I mentioned before, are always created in traditional Chinese and English for all our video outputs. Quality alt text for all images are always provided on the website. And it also, I guess rather selfishly from an institutional perspective, allows us to repurpose content in an easy way. So this alt text is obviously something that can sit within TMS, which is our collections database, and it can be reused for projects such as in-gallery guides, in-gallery experiences. So it's just a gift that continues to give for us. Here's an example of the transcripts that we've created and closed captions. And I guess the main point here is that transcripts, and if you take accessibility seriously, these sorts of things, as I mentioned, it gives to continue to give back to the organisation. Here's an interview we did with the Japanese artist Keiichi Tanami. So the interview was conducted in Japanese. Straight away, as with all our video outputs, we transcribe that as soon as we can, and we get it translated as soon as we can. That gives us something that's an output that's searchable and something that helps us in terms of SEO, but also our own internal research, and something that's indexable as well. So if someone many years from now can go back and look at this conversation and track where this happened within the video. It also allows us to repurpose content, as I mentioned before. So if we have an artist interview that goes for an hour, we create a 3-minute output, that's still 57 minutes left of material that we can use for other things. And we've been able to do that with the Hofun post, for instance. So that interview we did with Hofun, there's obviously a lot that we couldn't put within that video, but it's a great opportunity for us to go back and publish what wasn't in the video. So if we have a really short deadline, or we're really under the pump during a certain week, we can just go back to a transcript and relatively easily sort of turn out a piece of content with that. So repurposing material across all our channels is something that we take, something that we always plan for, I suppose. Another example is from our Ask a Curator Day. So we don't really want to reinvent the wheel each time we create a bit of content. We want each platform to do a specific job for us and enable it to do the heavy lifting in terms of functionality, while allowing us to focus on content. So we have a Ask a Curator regular series on stories. This is something that we sort of go back to for every exhibition, that allows visitors to ask questions directly to the curators. We cross-purpose that on Instagram stories, and that space on the right is where people can use QR codes, which are still super popular in Hong Kong, to sort of ask questions, and it links people back to the website. So it's a way that we can sort of answer their queries publicly on our blog as a regular feature. Language and tagging was another big part of this project, and I would say one of the biggest sort of takeaways we've garnered with this project is the development of our workflows. When we created this project, we were creating the content alongside the platform, which was extremely challenging at times, but it sort of gave us a really good insight into the practicalities around what we have to consider moving forward. So it allowed us to develop relationships with trusted vendors. And it was also a really sort of big design question for the museum. How do we service the fact that we're an institution of Hong Kong? We have multiple audiences, and how can we serve our constituents in a really good way in both languages? This is an early iteration of the titling Zach Group developed for our website. We sort of refined this later on, and it became a way that we could sort of toggle between two languages as opposed to just servicing both languages side by side. It's obviously challenging too with regards to accessibility features, where you have two different character sets sitting side by side. So someone who's vision impaired could potentially have a few issues in navigating the site when you're sort of servicing both character types at the same time. So we worked very closely with the Hong Kong Blind Union and Zach Group to find a solution that sort of worked well for us. It also allowed us to develop our interim digital identity that we can use on upcoming projects. So we have a collections beta website coming online soon, and creating M+ stories and developing a style guide for this editorial platform has allowed us basically to reuse the CSS and repurpose it for subsequent online outputs until we have a finalized branding guide for our museum. And underlying this whole project is an experimental tag-based framework. So this is something that we're playing around with for a long time behind the scenes. We ran a lot of tagging workshops for our curators and other content creators across the museum. And it's basically a way in which we can group our content that preferences subject to chronology or section. The framework is part of a broader strategy as it regards tagging for the institution and the kinds of lenses we use for storytelling. We see tags as another in to our content, a way to explore material for people that might not always be familiar with contemporary art and visual culture. And it's also a way of positing a sense of empathy into our content creators' minds, a way to think about summing up their content in definable terms whilst they're making it and putting them in the visitor's shoes as it regards how they come across content, how they consume it, and how we can communicate more clearly. The image on the right is an explore section, the Chinese green cap from the website. So it's something that obviously we're refining at the moment in terms of how we group these tags together and how we might repurpose this taxonomy for non-editorial content down the track. And I suppose another big part of this is designing for colleagues. This was one of the key challenges, I think, with this project, and it's sort of helped define our relationship with ICT moving forward. Initially, they came to us with a solution, a technical solution that they wanted us to use, and it wasn't necessarily fit for purpose for our small team to develop content on what's essentially a blog and video platform. So when we shifted solutions, we were using a CMS called ProcessWire. We really thought carefully about how content enters the system and how people are going to spend their days in this system. So at the top of this presentation, I spoke about making things that fit. I think it's really important to think about colleagues, obviously, when designing these sorts of projects, because they're going to be spending their entire work days within these systems. So it's got to work for them, and it's got to make their lives easier and allow them to do their jobs in a way that's as painless as possible, essentially. So this shift in focus for us was really important. We're using an open source CMS. All our code is available on GitHub, and this is all out in the open. So anyone can see this, anyone who's interested. We're working very openly and transparently. We believe it's the role of an institution, especially if you're funded by public money, to sort of be as open as possible and to allow people to reuse code and understand the learnings that come out of a given project. This is just an example of the back end, and yeah, so we thought about how easy is it for someone who doesn't speak Chinese to work within this CMS, and likewise, how easy is it for someone whose first language isn't English to work within the CMS. So we came up with a really simple solution, and one that works pretty well for our organisation. So what's next? This idea of creating something that fits into someone's day is an idea that's really sort of stuck with me. And I think it's also a question that relates to museums and their role in society more broadly. What I think we've done with this project, and we've done successfully, is lay the groundwork for what comes next. This project isn't as involved as a complete museum website build is going to be. There's no ticketing integration, we're not selling anything, but it's really built up our team's expertise in certain areas. It's allowed us to develop these really convoluted and long workflows that take a long time to get stuff online, but we've taken so much away from that. It's just been an invaluable process. And I think importantly too, it's really allowed us to experiment with content and what's important and what sort of hits with our visitors and how we sort of build upon that internally. How do we take what we learn and how do we sort of turn that into tangible results? Moving ahead, we're going to be doing a lot more work with artist commissions. This is one that we just launched, hardcore digital detox, I think just a week and a half ago now. So we've developed a new content arm where we'll be working very closely with Hong Kong artists and artists in the region, people that we find interesting, to show their work and allow our platform to become a showcase for them and to give back to the arts community in the region. We're still at the very beginning, so we still have a long ways to go before we open our doors in 2020, and we're learning every day. This time next year, I think we'll be able to harness the potential of the museum API, which we're currently building at the moment. We'll have had subsequent open data releases, and we'll continue to partner with artists as it regards online commissions. We're also looking towards other partnerships with digital makers and designers who are experimenting with the nature of digital and pushing its boundaries. We believe that's really important as an institution. So there's so much more to learn and so much more to come, but like I said, this has been a really good sort of anchor point for us to look forward and plan for the future. Thank you very much. we're just over time, so if there's any questions, please do shout them out. Otherwise, yeah, come and see me after.
Can you talk a little bit about how you created your taxonomy?
Sure. So that question was about how we created our taxonomies. Basically, we had multiple sessions with curators with a lot of post-it notes, and we basically came up with a brief for what kinds of content we would be creating and creating ways in which we could sort of segment those bits of content down and how we could apply different words to them. So we developed a few lenses, and this sort of was just us brainstorming. So we used emojis as a lens, we used emotions, and we used typical museum sort of buckets as well. So it was a very sort of organic process, and it's something, like I said, it's something we're still refining. We don't have the final answer yet. And when we've tried to apply this to other projects, we've sort of learned that this is very editorial in nature, so it might not always make sense for a collections beta website, for instance. So it's something that we're still sort of playing with, and it's very much a work in flux at the moment. Great. Thanks all.
Thank you.